I grew some roses in the garden at our last home. And so on some of the evenings, I'd go around and with a watering can and water each of the roses. And on one of those evenings, my youngest daughter was walking with me, and she was quite little at the time. She said, "Dad, you give roses water, otherwise they die." "That's right," I answered. And then after a few moments of processing, she said, "And if the roses die, then you won't need to give them any water." Well, I couldn't argue with her logic. But I did point out that if the roses died because they were thirsty for water, that wouldn't be nice for the roses, and it wouldn't be nice for us. And she readily agreed that we must keep the roses alive by stopping them from going thirsty. And so I've titled today's message, "Keeping Creation Alive on One Good Friday." Our passage shows us some of the last moments of Jesus' life. But it was by no means a quick death. After agonizing the previous night in the Garden of Gethsemane over all that was going to happen to him, Jesus was arrested and then interrogated right through the night before being made to appear before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. And then after the sham trial we read about, Jesus was handed over to the Roman soldiers for a flogging. And once they were done, they mocked him over the accusation that he claimed to be the King of the Jews by pressing a crown of thorns into his head. And as they mocked him, they assaulted him. Then they forced him to carry his own cross on a walk of shame out of Jerusalem to the place of execution. And there they nailed him, hands and feet to the cross, before pulling it upright. And having been suspended on that cross in that way for almost 3 hours, verse 28 of our passage says, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." And so the first point I draw is this: dying of thirst. Just 3 words, "I am thirsty." But for the one who said, "Whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst again," those words capture the extent of Jesus' own suffering. This wasn't just a physical thirst that we might experience as humans. This was a far more excruciating thirst. As the Son of God poured out every last drop of his own eternal life for you and me. This was the soul thirst of God's own Son, as he is completely cut off from his Father, the God of life, while the unspeakable ungodliness of our sin is taken on him, and he pays the price the punishment for the entirety of it all. Matthew 27 tells us that in this moment, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And Isaiah 53 tells us why. "We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us have turned to our own way, and the Lord laid on him the iniquity, the sin of us all." And so Jesus said, "I am thirsty." He was thirsting our thirst, all of our thirst, while pouring out his life so that we never have to know this thirst again. Because if the rose gets no water, it will die. The second point I draw, ending the thirst. Immediately Jesus had said these words, "I'm thirsty." Our passage says, well, a jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. And when he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. What was finished? His physical suffering? Yes. His mortal life? Yes. But Jesus meant far more than just that. Isaiah 53 again gives us insight into the far more part. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. In other words, for those of us who knew what it was like to go to the headmaster's office for the wrong reasons, or the housemaster, imagine if that was you and the person who you regarded as the least worthy of your attention offered to go in your place. That's what it means. The punishment that brought us peace, that set us free from that punishment, was on him. And in the language of the Bible, words like transgressions and iniquities are other words used for the plain text word, sin, ungodliness. And the Bible also clearly explains in Romans 6:23, the wages, the punishment of sin is death. That's what sin earns us, death. In other words, putting all of that together, Jesus died for your sin, for our sin. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he was declaring that he had completed the full and final payment for our sin. The last stroke of the lash had been laid on him. And so the punishment was finished. You and I never have to be punished because it was laid on him. It's finished, said Jesus. The price is paid. The sacrifice has been made for you. It is done. He had completed the mission that he was sent to do, and he had settled our sin debt to God in full. Paid in full. Imagine owing a fortune to many, and the creditors are foreclosing, and you're about to lose everything. And not only you, but those who depend on you are about to be destitute. You hear a knock at the door and you think it's the sheriff, but it's a messenger, a courier. You tear open the courier bag and there's a legal letter inside. It says paid in full. It's all yours. By someone who you never expected to pay the price for you. Our debt has been paid in full by Jesus. It is finished. When he said it is finished, he meant that he had put an end to our spiritual thirst, the thirst that always results in eternal death. He had put an end to our eternal separation from the God of love, life, and everything perfect and good. He ended that separation so that we could enjoy the God of love and life and everything perfect and good. If they don't get water, they will die. And if they die, they won't need water anymore, said my daughter. Well, Jesus died. Jesus thirsted so that we will never be short of water again. Because just as he promised, whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst again. John 4:14. Jesus died to end our thirst that would have led to death. And the last point is dealing with the thirst. Our human thirst is so evident in our relentless pursuit for an inner satisfaction that continues to evade us. A non-Christian blogger wrote this: we're settling for junk food while starving for soul food. And we're quenching our thirst on a shallow kind of love. What I wouldn't have said, but was absolutely true, is that I wanted someone to come along and give me all the things I didn't have in my life. Self-esteem, a sense of security, and an assurance that I was worthy of love. The relentless pursuit for satisfaction that continues to evade the human without Christ. As humans, we look for relationships and we look for careers and material comforts and experiences and pleasures and recognition, and sometimes even distractions and ways to numb the cry of our souls, to try to quench our human thirst, our longing for more, but all the while it's the cry of an empty soul saying, I am thirsty. In the final verse of our passage, the gospel writer John tells us, who was also the disciple of Jesus, the one whom Jesus loved. John tells us why he recorded what we read today. Referring to himself, John says, the man who saw all this has given testimony, and his testimony is true. And he testifies so that you also may believe. Believe what? These are written, continues John, that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John 20, verse 31. The human finds true life, which is eternal life, and which is not the same as being physically alive, by believing that Jesus is God's Son, who died to pay the full price for our sin, so that we will never have to thirst to death again. You give the roses water, otherwise they die. Jesus gave his life, his all, so that we never have to die. That by believing, you may have life in his name. This is Good Friday. Thanks be to God.